Good morning. This is Pat O'Connell calling to order a 2025 summer readiness of utilities informational session. That's a mouthful. It's April 16th. Apologies for starting a little late. It's a hybrid meeting, so we're streaming this online, and there's quite a few of us here in the Bochum building. So welcome. Glad to see everybody here today. The concept of this meeting is that, that New Mexico tends to be summer peaking electric load. And so just get everybody in together to see how things are going and get an outlook for the summer and pricing. And then that'll help with context if, I guess I should say when, things don't go according to plan as the summer rolls on. So appreciate everybody being here and reviewed the slides and looking forward to thoughtful presentations. So having kicked it off, will you call the roll, Mr. Cameron?
Commissioner Nyberg?
Present, and I apologize for my lateness.
Commissioner O'Connell?
Here.
Commissioner Aguilera? Present. All commissioners are here and you have a quorum if you need it, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. We have an agenda in front of us. It's pretty simple. We'll see if there's anybody here for public comment. And then allow commissioners to make remarks, and then we'll jump into it with the presentation. So any changes that we need to make to the agenda? Seeing none, we'll proceed with what was posted. Is there anybody here that wants to provide public comment? Opportunity to get in front of your boss, that kind of thing. Yeah, when I was doing IRP, people would ask questions like, well, thank you for the opportunity to fire myself, but I will not answer that question. Mr. Rodriguez, I don't know if you're there. Do we have anybody signed up that wants to do public comment online?
Mr. Chair, we don't have anyone online for public comment.
Okay, great. I've already provided my remarks. I'll turn it over to Commissioner Aguilera. Is there anything you're looking forward to or need to say before we get started?
Thank you all for being here. I think we did this the last 2 years, and I think it's helpful to kind of do a pulse check and see where we are for the summer. I think things maybe were a little bit tougher a couple of years ago. I anticipate that with load growth and retirements, they will continue to get tougher. So I think this is a good opportunity for everybody to make sure that we're on the same page. And, if there's anything that we need to react to or the utilities need to do, good opportunity to communicate that with the commission and stakeholders as well. So thank you for being here. Look forward to the presentations.
I would just state that we call it summer readiness, but since I was in the yard last weekend and it was about 100 degrees outside, I'm wondering if this should be springtime and summer readiness because temperatures seem to be spiking already.
Hopefully Mr. Rodriguez is ready with your slide deck and you could join us in the front of room here. That means P&M's on deck. So this is just pretty informal conversation. And so the floor is yours. Feel free to manage it however you like. Yeah, that would be good. EPE speaking to P&M slides.
Yeah, we're in big trouble.
We're gonna
The state is in trouble.
Yeah, Patrick, I think we need oh, you've got them all.
There we go.
There we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I'm Jim Sheastel with El Paso Electric Regulatory and Customer Solutions, and we've got a couple of folks here and introduce themselves. And we appreciate this, and I guess it is I was trying to remember, it's third time, right? Third year now. much better than 2023, I think, for us. So yeah, so we have a presentation for you, and then we can obviously answer any questions you want to get to. And then the session this afternoon, I guess, is tied in at least a little bit in terms of our load expectations. So I think it's a good combination of the subject matter. So I'll let these guys introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Daniel Dominguez, and I'm the supervisor of real-time training there with El Paso Electric. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good morning, everybody. This is Emmanuel Villalobos. I'm the Director for Market Development and Resource Strategy at El Paso Electric. We can go ahead and get started. Our next slide, please. So this is a basic informational slide on EPE. Our service territory spans a 10,000 square mile area. We are a multi-jurisdictional utility that spans both Texas and New Mexico. Our service territory goes from Hatch, New Mexico, all the way to Van Horn, Texas. The New Mexico portion of our system is about 20 to 22% of our total system load, of which 110,000 customers are in the New Mexico service territory. The service map that you see there, you can see our natural gas plants, our solar facilities, and then way far out west, you'll see our ownership stake in Palo Verde, the nuclear facility out of Arizona. Next slide. So here we're talking about the 2024 performance. So the way we're going to address the summer readiness discussion is we'll talk to you a little bit about what the planning perspective was, or that planning lens that we use, and then how that transitioned over to the actual operational view. For 2024, the forecasted load was 2338. The actual load came in at 2316. So that's a variance of 1% from the forecast, the testament to our load forecast group that's here in person today. That's different from the story we saw in 2023 that had record high temperatures, and we set a record peak 6 years in advance of what we were expecting. So the fact that in 2024 we maintained that peak says that the 2023 peak was not a fluke or not just based off of weather, but it's actual sustained growth. We'll go to the next slide. So as part of the summer preparedness, for our summer peak, you can see that we have our entire portfolio participating or producing megawatts at our time of peak. You see solar, gas, nuclear, purchase power, and battery. Over our winter peak, since that winter peak does shift, we don't have solar or purchase power contributing at time of peak. As was mentioned, since we are a summer peaking utility, that is why. Our next slide. So what we want to introduce here are just the general terms that will be discussed. You've seen this before when we've presented our LNR, our loads and resources table. So the generic terms that we're going to be going through, your generation resources, again, that's just whatever generation you have within your portfolio. Your resource purchases is what we would use if we had anything on the LNR side, anything that was locked in long-term ahead of time. We have our planned resources, which are resources that are not online yet, but have been approved, contracted. So these are future resources. Everything that you see within the LNR and the planning perspective, the capacity numbers are calculated off of our ELCC. So that's our effective load carrying capability. So that's basically the measurement of your generation and what it can produce or contribute at your time of peak. And important to keep in mind here is that currently for our planning view, we look at a 9% planning reserve margin. We can go to the next slide. So like I had mentioned earlier, EPE is a multi-jurisdictional utility. So we do planning for our system as a whole, as well as for each individual jurisdiction. So what you're seeing here is a simplified LNR table for our New Mexico service base. So for the total accredited capacity, that's your capacity after your ELCC measurements have been taken. We are estimating 380 megawatts for 2025. Your firm load obligations that we're estimating at 488. Our planning reserve margin of 9% of that 488 is 44 megawatts. Your total capacity need therefore is at 532 megawatts. What that means is that the difference between your total capacity need and your total accredited capacity, we're estimating, or at least on the planning side, forecasting a shortfall of 152 megawatts.
Yeah, I had a question about this slide. My understanding is EPE dispatches the system to meet load. Is that true?
Yes.
Then what's the point of this? Are you telling us you're gonna treat New Mexico customers differently?
No, no, absolutely not. It's just to highlight the difference in the capacity values between each jurisdiction. I mean, but the system does get dispatched as a whole. But if you were to be looking at it from what resources are strictly Texas resources versus New Mexico resources, that's how you would be able to, the lens with which you could see that table.
Yeah, I mean, that's my question is in the moment, are you sitting here thinking, well, that's a New Mexico load and a Texas resource, so
Oh,
to heck with New Mexico?
no, not at all.
And Mr. Chairman, I mean, I one perspective of this, at least from a regulatory perspective, is if you look at that New Mexico capacity, the 380, that's the resources that New Mexico customers have cost responsibility for. So for example, it's a combination of both what we refer to as system resources. That is a resource that serves both jurisdictions, and we allocate costs between and megawatts between the two jurisdictions based on their actual relative usages. So Texas is it's about 4 to 1, Texas and New Mexico. So generally we're going about, we just simplified it 80-20, right? New Mexico is 20% of our sales, and Texas 80. And so a portion of that accredited capacity is those shared resources, the system resources. And then coupled with that is for New Mexico, at least, a significant amount of dedicated resources, primarily renewables, so primarily solar and some battery storage. And so
Yeah, I mean, I understand all that, especially that's kind of a rate case perspective, but just coming into this morning where we're looking at when the system peaks, will we have enough for the peak? This slide kind of threw me off because it looked like you were going to treat New Mexicans different.
No.
And then I'm not seeing necessarily our purchases included in this total accredited capacity.
No, they're not. They wouldn't be.
Yeah, because
Only
the
if they-
Palo Verde is treated as a purchase though, right?
No. Palo Verde is treated as a portion of that top line capacity number.
All right, well, okay, so I'm previewing a question for slide 8, but. Okay, so anyway, I think I understand what's going on here with slide 6, so thank you.
Go to the next slide. This here is just a status update on some of the new resources that we have coming up or most recent additions to our generation portfolio. The first of which is that Carne solar and storage system. We've been filing our quarterly status reports on the Carne project. The updated COD for that is February of 2026. We have on the list here, our Santa Teresa project. That is a new project that we will be including as part of our REA filing on May 1st. That's a 50 megawatts solar portion for New Mexico as a result of the RPS. The total facility is 150 megawatts solar, 150 megawatt battery. We also have an update there to our customer dedicated facilities. Those are our community solar. That one is split between New Mexico and Texas. So that's that split, 10 to New Mexico, 30 to Texas. And then the last additions that we had to the system were Buena Vista 1 and Buena Vista 2. Those are Buena Vista 1, which is a system resource, and Buena Vista 2, which is a New Mexico dedicated resource. And those came online in 2023. I can move on to the next slide. Pass that on to Mr. Lemay.
Good morning. So for this slide, this is on a system basis. This isn't on a New Mexico basis. So this is both Texas and New Mexico. And kind of what I've created here is a load curve that's kind of anchored on the 2389 peak number that we're forecasting. And so what I've done is I've kind of gotten last year's averages for each hour ending in comparison to what the peak hour was. Therefore, provided some kind of a forecast for each hour of the day. And then from there, I've stacked resources more so based on, they're kind of categorized by like operating characteristics. So the very bottom must run category is more so units that are not very flexible, units that have to be sort of, once they're brought online, have to be kept online because of the fact that they might take a little bit longer to get going and be stabilized. On top of that, that purplish color there is our PV generation that we see. And then after that, that yellow that yellow color there is our solar profile that you see starting up with hour ending 8. It does bleed a little bit into hour ending 22 since we do have a co-located resource that has a battery in it. So that's what you see there for hours ending 21, 22. And then on top of that is where we have our peakers that you see starting to get dispatched hour ending 12, being brought offline probably by midnight. So hour ending 24 of the operating day. And then on top of that, in the gray would be the projected market purchases that we have in order to be able to meet that number of 2389. So total obligations between the 2389, your contingency reserves of about 6% is about 2528 in total obligations. So the projected solar that I have, even though nameplate is about 249, we expect during that peak hour to provide us about 188. That's inclusive of the battery. And then the PV output for those particular hours in the afternoon is about a 623. That's historically what we've seen. And then we have thermal generation between the reliability must run and our peaker units of about 1629 for total available capacity of about 2440. So with this in mind, we have about projected market purchases of 175. We do have that 40 megawatts of the PV3 New Mexico portion that's been sold off. So that's also a firm obligation. So total imports are about 808 at that point in time for that peak hour. So that'll give us a position of about 47 for that peak hour.
Yeah, and that's where my confusion is coming from is the New Mexico portion of PV3 is not all of PV3. So I guess just explain to me why that's called out separately.
It's called out because so total ownership in terms of PV would be about a 623 is what we receive in terms of between all three units. But we have sold off that 40 since it's not being used to serve load is really what it comes down to. And so really what we have available to serve load is more the 623 minus the 40, which comes out to about a 583. That's pretty much what we plan with in terms of PV output.
So that PV3 New Mexico portion is the resource that was never certificated in New Mexico, but that we had used for a long period of time under a contract with New Mexico. But then in the last rate case, that proposal was rejected. So now that 40 megawatt, which is roughly New Mexico's portion of PV3.
My confusion is that we've got a purchase and a sale there, and they both have the same sign. So
Yeah, sorry.
One of those
that would be on me.
adding
Yes, that would be on me. So definitely the sale portion there would be more of a negative. So, and if anything, I would probably pair it up with the PV portion up top. And so I just kind of wanted to call it out. And so it's 623 minus the 40 would be more so what we have in terms of capacity with.
So the 623 is really more like 583.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then 175 is what you're expecting would need to purchase under this scenario.
Yes, sir.
Or it's 175 plus 40.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I have a question on this slide as well. When we're looking at the must run, which doesn't include the Palo Verde, what resources are included
Sure, included in there would be, so I do have a couple of resources included in there, which we don't know exactly how we'll use them. I do imagine that by the time that we get to peak day, something like Newman 6 is included in reliability must run, even though it can be turned off and turned on because of the high costs associated with startup. If we're gonna have normally peak day, there's like a run up to it. And so we wouldn't be turning it off for 4 hours, only to be turning it back on for morning hours. So there is Newman 6, there's Newman 5, Newman 4, Newman 3, Newman 2, Newman 1. I do have Rio 6 modeled in there. So if we were to take that out, we don't start up that unit and we feel like we can make it without it, that would take out another about 45 megawatts or so. Rio 7, Rio 8, those would be the units that are associated with the reliability must run.
So these are steam units at Rio Grande and Newman.
Steam units, older units that definitely can't be started up within a quick, 2-3 hours and stabilized. Anything apart from that, I think we can sort of cycle off and on a daily basis.
Okay, thank you. And then with the market purchases, so I think it's about 175. When do you start to procure those resources?
Those will happen on a day-ahead basis. The 175 is not a part, because it's something we do, pretty normally, particularly since we only really need them for those hours of 17 to like 22 or so. There's not really much of a need to go out and procure them on a month ahead basis. So we do something we look at on a day ahead basis. And so let's just say day ahead will trade us to something very close to the 175. And then in real time, if we see that load is getting either higher or lower, then we'll kind of make a corrective action there and sort of buy the rest of it.
Okay, and then when you join the RAP, the Western Resource Adequacy Program, do you then need to show that you have these resources 7 months in advance?
I don't have full answers for RAP, so.
Manual.
So part of the forward showing for RAP, we will have to show what resources are available in the 7-month forward showing. So yeah, that would be included.
Okay, so it changes the strategy some. Whether that's, better or not, I don't know, but, okay, thank you.
Next slide, please. So here for this next slide, we have projected energy cost on the bilateral day-ahead market. The costs that we see there are the PV index pricings that we see. These forward pricings were provided to me by our forward trader mid-March or so, so they are subject to change. So we will see something between $45 and $110 for summer. And then on the natural gas side, we're approximating that we're going to burn about 260,000 MMBTUs of gas. We have about 265,000 of firm reservation for capacity. So we're getting very close to sort of maxing out our firm capacity on the pipelines. We have already secured 40,000 MMBTUs for the months of April through October. It is kind of this tiered approach that we take where we'll buy seasonal gas to kind of get us closer so we're not having to procure so much on a monthly, daily basis. And then as we get closer to the month, we'll go ahead and procure another big portion of it on a monthly basis. And then as we get to each day, we'll go ahead and refine that a little bit more and buy whatever is left. If we do need to buy spot pricing on spot gas, it's very rare that we do so, but we will go ahead and do that. Normally we'll account for it on the next day unless we have some kind of constraint on the pipeline, and then we're having to make those adjustments in real time. Summer estimated gases for natural gas will be between $1.76 and $2.09 throughout the whole summer. And we expect that to materialize. I know last year we did see some unprecedented prices in terms of, I think we had a portfolio price of about 60 cents for most of summer. We actually had -8 cents for all of August. We don't expect that to occur again because of the fact that there was another pipeline that was built out, Matterhorn, that sort of runs from the Permian Basin where we receive most of our capacity from, most of our supply, that runs down to Houston. So I expect that to sort of increase demand within the Permian Basin. So we expect these prices to sort of materialize, and we're already seeing a little bit of that during this month. Next slide. And here for this last slide, it's just some of the possible risks that can sort of kind of drive off some of the things that I've been talking about here. Definitely prolonged heat waves will kind of increase prices, increase demand, particularly if these heat waves hit somewhere within California or within the Northwest. That tends to drive up pricing quite a bit. Gas prices are currently favorable, but if that happens to be the case, that increases demand. And so they kind of go hand in hand. And so any kind of increased heat waves that prolong, like we saw in 2023. I know last year was also kind of warm, and we saw ourselves kind of having, maybe our peak demand wasn't as high, but sort of living above what I would consider to be like normal ranges for prolonged hours. We saw a little bit more of that. So it's kind of, prolonged. I guess our peak wasn't as peaky, I guess you could say, is more so a little bit curved off. And so that can also drive up some of the increases in pricing. Of course, any kind of disruptions in supply, whether it be hurricanes hitting critical infrastructure, can also drive up pricing for these two markets. Next slide.
Well, I think we've already covered these in terms of climate and infrastructure upgrades. We mentioned our thermal resources. Some of those are very old. You all recently approved our abandonment of 2 units going out into the future when contingent upon adequate resources, obviously, but 2 of those units, for example, at the Rio Grande, the Rio Grande 6 has already been approved for abandonment. 7 is, and Newman 1 were in that your most recent order. And so the ability, and I think Danny mentioned, whether or not we have Rio 6 in that first line of must run. And we're really getting to the point where we're having to look at, okay, these units are not going to operate in the summer. And so that is one aspect here that we are having to deal with. The huge uncertainty now, I'm sure everyone would anticipate, the huge uncertainty now is just around supply chain. Obviously that's not and specifically with respect to tariffs and other things, but that has more to do with timing on resources coming in. Which of course also has an impact on the timing of resources being abandoned. But that's a big uncertainty that has materialized this year. And so I think that we're in, with respect to all these, probably the biggest near-term risk is just the unexpected, whether it be weather or a event on a unit that we didn't anticipate. But otherwise, I think we're in really good shape. The rest of these are, in my mind, a little further. They're certainly affecting our ability in the future to both make the transition to more renewables, meet the RPS requirements, serve load, especially when we'll have our discussion later this afternoon about expected demand increases with new customers and new large load customers. So all of those are going to put pressure on us going forward. With respect to this summer, I think Danny's already really covered where those risks lie for this summer. I'm going to go to the next slide, unless there's any questions on this.
Well, no, I mean, you answered my question. I was confused as to which of these were this summer. And
Yeah.
then the big question is always, what's EPE doing to mitigate these risks since you've identified them?
The ones that sort of going forward. I think Danny's talked about mitigation on, if you want to talk about.
Yeah, no, I mean, the point of this morning was this summer, so.
Yeah. I think we've already discussed these, right? And sort of got a little ahead of myself, but certainly the transition to newer resources, that has been challenging for us, both from the perspective of ultimately abandoning units. I mean, these are, for example, Rio Grande, the 2 Rio Grande units, Rio Grande 6 and 7 are both going on 65 years old. They're older than me. But and also there is that desire to transition from those units for a variety of reasons to then the replacement units. But then, as you all know, we've had a struggle with getting new units online. We mentioned Buena Vista, which is one of our newest units. That's a solar plus storage facility in Chaparral, New Mexico in 2023. The second one there, Hecate, is the one that was planned but then never materialized. Kearney is on the way to being completed. So there is certainly an issue with delaying those resources. And then, the need for new resources obviously does not necessarily impact this summer, but it's certainly going to impact going forward. New higher load, especially with respect to large load customers that are going to be operating during peak. Very high load factor customers, but obviously the peak again is a concern. The off-peak periods with a high load factor customer are terrific because they allow you to maybe be more efficient on your existing resources. But there's a lot of uncertainty around that, although we have about 300 megawatts, and we'll talk about this afternoon, of new large load customers that are pretty solid for the next couple of years. And so we're really looking at, as Emmanuel said, we're bringing a new resource for RPS purposes, this in our REA filing in May. That's one of about 6 new facilities that we're in the process of contracting for, and it's coming out of an RFP that we did wrapped up last year, did resource selection. So those are all new solar and a lot of battery storage additions to our system. But we're looking at more than likely doing another RFP this summer, just in anticipation of these large loads. So that's really been the transition for us, has been from RFPs basically for existing and normal load growth, existing load and normal load growth, along with the abandonment of old units, the removal of old aging resources. So that all happened, with no anticipation towards these larger load customers that have really materialized over the last just few years. So we're having to pivot to, and as it says here, trying to finally get ahead of the resource procurement and planning for resources in anticipation of some of those. And then obviously just that underlying all of that is our attempt to transition to cleaner resources. We're fortunate, I think, in terms of weather exposure. El Paso Electric at least is. We managed the freeze in 21, I think, really well because of planning that came out of a prior freeze. But otherwise, our main exposure is really high winds and heat on the weather side. So that's where most of our preparations are around. Anything on this, commissioners?
Well, I was curious about what the status of the Eddy County DC tie is right now.
So we are in the process of we're working on right now a CCN application for the Eddy tie to replace the Eddy tie. There's still a lot of uncertainty. I say that I don't think we're fully committed to, yes, we will replace the tie, but that's our planning at this point, is going towards replacing the Eddy tie.
I mean, in terms of readiness this summer, is it usable?
You guys?
It's honestly hard to say. It's not a particularly reliable. I didn't include it within the modeling. That would add in another 133 or so megawatts of imports from the eastern portion of our system. So I didn't include it within that. That's more of a system operations, we'll call it out. If I had to take a guess, I would say that they are going to turn it on. As to whether it stays on is more, it is a little bit more difficult to tell.
And we've taken that position, right? I think the last couple of years where we don't plan for it, but we have used it.
I was just asking because we had a previous presentation where it sounded like you were pulling 40 megawatts through that all the time.
So if it is online, it has to stay on around the clock for, I think, a total of 3 days, at the very least 3 days. But normally what they'll do is they'll be pretty strategic as when they're going to turn it on. So as we continue to see load kind of continue to increase and we feel like we're getting close to what would be a peak period, that might be times where system operations asks us to try and turn it on.
So they is system operations.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, but it's not on right now.
No, sir. No, it's mostly used during summer and really only during summer. Thank you for your.
I think here we're just with, it's just some topics if we wanted to get your, RAP already came up. You probably are aware, we're in the middle of our IRP public process. Started a couple months ago. Our expectations will file our IRP in September of this year. And I think the linkage there, especially with this discussion of procuring new resources, is that process coming out of the IRP of identify resource needs and then pivot to an RFP. I've already talked about the other resources, which we do reporting on. Rio Grande 6, is, I think, our last report. If I recall, our last report, I guess last year, was that the original Rio 6 abandonment approvals were contingent upon certain resources coming online. Newman Unit 6 was one of them. That Buena Vista facility that's online was one. So both of those are online, but the third was the Hecate facility. And so what we essentially said in our replacement report was the Santa Teresa facility has already been mentioned, which is 150 megawatt solar, 150 megawatt battery. And Hecate, if you recall, was 150 megawatt solar facility. Our perspective is that really the Kearney facility acts as a replacement for at least for New Mexico, and in terms of what they would have gotten from New Mexico would have gotten from Hecate. And so we're looking at Rio 6 replacement resources as essentially being satisfied once Kearney starts. But certainly Santa Teresa will be an addition to that. So we're really at the level of, or we're at the point of being able to say that Rio 6 is officially abandoned. But then I discussed the other resources there. So unless there's any, I think this is our last slide. Any questions?
Yeah, sorry, apologize if I missed it, but what did you note about demand response?
I didn't actually, but and I think, I believe on the resource table, it's as they said, a simplified LNR, but we have an interruptible program that covers about 40 megawatts of resources, again, for the peak hour. And we are looking at expanding. We really need to look at expanding even to a larger extent our demand resources. Our interruptible program is largely it is a emergency program. And so meaning we would only call it essentially as a last resort, as opposed to an economic resource that we might compare to the availability of as Danny said, day ahead or even day of, you have this availability of this resource, this 40, 50 megawatt resource. So we've planned and are expanding the interruptible program, and at least we're in a Texas rate case right now. We're looking at modifying the interruptible program to be both economic and emergency, so that we could use it more as an active resource as opposed to sort of a pure emergency resource. And my expectation is we'll do the same, make the same proposal in New Mexico. And I think that just to throw in here, I mean, as we start thinking about these large load customers that are operating, very high load factor, 90% plus load factor, this thinking about what those customers, that type of customer, especially that magnitude of load, could provide you in a demand response situation, whether it's because they have backup generation or there are things they can do. I know that the conversation is usually, well, we can never turn this stuff off. And then when you start getting a little bit more discussion, it's, well, maybe we can, reduce during the peak period. So I think that offers for us, as we work with these customers, the potential, at least in the near term, of dealing with peak demands caused by these customers if they have some flexibility around demand response. But I think that's an area where we really need to increase our capability on demand response, because that flexibility of that resource is going to become more and more important.
Thank you. Since this is the last slide, can we go back to slide 8? And so during like 2 a.m. to, I don't know, like 8 a.m., there's this surplus, and it seems like you have some resources that you're effectively treating as must run because they may not be flexible. And so I'm just wondering, what are you doing with these resources at this time? Are you including them in your EIM base schedules and bidding them into the market, or are they not included? And so
Yeah. So we could sell them off bilaterally if we wanted to. Now, I would like to point out that this is max capacity.
Mhm.
And so there is flexibility within the dispatch range. So we can bring them from, I think the reliability must run number is about 1150 or so in max capacity. You could bring them down and sort of, you don't have to sell off anything if you don't want to. If it's not economical to do so, we wouldn't do so. So there is that opportunity to do so. Now, the light load hours, if I'm not mistaken, over the last couple of years have been very strong in terms of pricing. And then our gases tends to be pretty favorable. So we're more so recovering a little bit of the cost. So that average cost for the day comes down a bit for customers.
Okay. Thank you. And then it sounded like never mind, I just answered my own question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Easy one.
It was an easy one, I think.
Okay, so I think we're gone through the slides. Are there any other questions? Feedback? And then again, I appreciate just the spirit of this morning, as we know we're already there, going into winter or summer air conditioning season, and trying to understand what situation we're at. Don't want to. My preview of looking at the slides, I think, is what Commissioner Aguilera said. This is more optimistic.
I think that if you look at say this versus 23, I don't know what we would have said in advance of 23. I don't remember what we did say, but certainly 23 was a real test for our system. Because as we said, we jumped ahead about 6 years on forecasted peak demand in 2023. And we managed in 2023, and since then we've added essentially two resources. So we're in, I think, better shape in that perspective. But if we have peak demand of 2020, that level of peak demand again, I think it will test the system. But I think 23 for us was okay. We can, this system is resilient enough to handle something really unexpected. From a planning perspective or forecast perspective. So we feel in pretty good shape. I think not only that we won't experience 23 again, but the fact that we managed in 23. So we feel pretty good about 25.
Thank you. So it looks like we need to replace some microphone batteries, and then it's also E&M's turn. Get a little bit of a transition here.
Yeah, we can probably pass between us. We need to. Okay.
You ready?
Okay.
Everyone?
Okay.
Good morning. My name is Lisa Contreras. I'm a senior project manager with our regulatory policy and case management at PNM. Appreciate the time this morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, for PNM to come in and have the opportunity to share our summer readiness, understanding the importance of this. I too like my air conditioner to come on during the summer, during the peak. So understand how important this is for all of our customers. With me today is Lori Williams, our Vice President of our integrated planning, as well as Stephen Maestas, who's our Director of our wholesale power marketing. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Lori.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you guys for having us here. Appreciate it. I think we are like El Paso. I think we're in pretty good shape for the summer of 25. Several of our remaining San Juan and Palo Verde replacement resources have come online. And actually this week we have another resource coming online. We'll be energizing tag, solar, and battery storage on Friday. All things going well. So we are prepared to meet the 2025 summer peak. We'll go to the first slide here. Based on the seasonal operations, we are our existing portfolio as well as some market purchases. So we'll talk through exactly how we've positioned ourselves, but generally speaking, we are ready to go with between our wholesale power market purchases and our existing resource portfolio, including the additions we've made recently. Fuel cost projections, I think, seem reasonable at this time. Of course, those are always subject to change depending on how things go over the course of the summer, but they look good right now. We plan to additionally utilize real-time and day-ahead markets. And I think when we came to talk to you last year, the same was true. We generally utilize the day-ahead and hourly markets to just keep things secured. And if we see, major weather coming through, those kinds of things, it's always available to us to utilize. We've gone through a process as we have every year to ensure reliability, doing our ongoing reviews, assessing our posture and continuing to make any necessary adjustments to our posture. So with that, we'll move to the next slide and I'll talk a little bit about what it looks like. So on the slide, you'll see a graph. This is our expected July peak loads compared to the resources we have ready to serve those loads. Resources by design, we generally have exceed the expected load demand. In this case, you'll see a couple of load levels on our slide here. The load represented by the blue bar on the left-hand side of the graph is our forecasted peak load for the summer. It's 2235. For reference and comparing against the last couple of summers, PNM's load in 2023, which is an all-time system peak, hit 2131. We didn't see quite the range in all-time peak versus forecast that El Paso saw, but a good chunk, a nice increase there. And last year we ended up seeing 2073 as our peak load that materialized over the course of the summer. Based on the resources procured in advance of the operating season, we have right now 2,441 megawatts procured and that is prior to an additional market purchase we are in the process of making right now for 25 additional megawatts, and I'll talk through why that is. But that puts us right around a reserve margin of just over 10% with that additional 25 megawatts added in. The system resources from thermal and renewable storage resource portfolios include, as you can see, ICAP and UCAP. So that's installed capacity for our thermal resources and accredited capacity for our renewables and battery storage. So that's when you are looking at the resource stack, that is not fully just installed resources, but you're doing the accredited and the thermal capability. We did have a failure of a generator step-up transformer, one of them at the Luna facility, which is a 2-on-1 gas combined cycle unit we have. That GSU failure, we expect to replace that GSU, but not until after the summer peak. That is not available to replace until later this year. So that is the purpose of the additional 25 megawatts that we're purchasing from the market. Our goal is to maintain the 10% reserve margin in advance of the season with the supplements from day ahead and real time as needed. All right, and in there, I know demand response was one of the questions earlier, Commissioner Aguilera, and in here, it's hard to read the amounts, but we do file that bi-monthly LNR, so you'll see more of the detail in that bi-monthly LNR we filed at the end of March. But generally speaking, there's about 23 megawatts of demand response included in that stack. Okay, moving to the next slide. We've got a look at the off-peak period. In better shape on the off-peak period, so expected off-peak load is about 1,548 megawatts, with about 2,099 megawatts available to serve that load, again on the same basis of ICAP and UCAP comparison. So it looks like we are in great shape on the off-peak period.
Was that number growing?
The off-peak load that we see, I'll ask Steve how much he sees it, but yes, all of our load is growing, both
Yeah,
on
it's,
peak
it's
and
growing in general, but I think the number there probably represents what we reflected for last summer's peak, off-peak period, which is typically our ending 23. We anticipate, but until we see it, I think our best projection is expect to see very similar type of peaks in that hour.
Okay, we'll move to the next slide. And I will pass it over to Steve here.
Okay, so confidence level. So how confident are we that we prepared to meet our peak load? Much like the past two summers, I'm trying to recollect and remember how summer 2023 played out, but I don't recall it being as problematic as El Paso led on to believe it. And part of it had to do maybe with how we prepared our system and with those resource adequacies. But this for summer 2025, I am very confident in terms that we're going to be well prepared and set up to be able to serve our peak load. And actually, the peak hour is not really even the concern that we have in our system. And I'm sure much like El Paso and they alluded to, it's typically when California is peaking, which is usually hour 1900s, like 9-10 o'clock at night is typically when the market's tight. And when you're trying to lean on the market to procure additional supply, that's when things can get rough. But given where the California ISO has been set up recently with the build out of their battery storage, there doesn't even appear to be that much of a problem again this coming summer. Summer of 24, there was, I think we mentioned that natural gas prices were negative for a good part of the summer. Power prices were in the toilet, I can say. This coming summer, I mean, prices are still, I mean, I think they're beginning to tick up again a little bit. I mean, but they're still pretty soft in general and nowhere near what we saw in summer of 2023 in terms, even from a forward-looking basis. Like right now, I think we mentioned that July on peak is right averaging around mid 80s or so, or maybe in that range, or said 90s. August is actually the premium month right now at over $100, 112. And again, we're talking for the standard on-peak block of energy, which is from beginning at 6 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night. But that doesn't really tell you during the peak hours of the evening, where even though the price is on average is trading $85, that goes to show you that across those evening peak hours, prices are going to probably trade over $100, $150, $200. It just all depends on just how tight the market is and how hot it is. But right now, projections and what we track, we're still waiting to get the California ISO's summer outlook. They typically will report out on that sometime in early May. Much like last year, I anticipate that their preparedness and capacity levels are going to be, they're going to have enough capacity to serve their peak demand. We also look at snowpack in the Pacific Northwest and in Northern California just to see, because that is also a driver in terms of, having that extra hydro on the system, especially in June and into July. If it was a bad winter season, no snowpack, then that could drive for additional capacity. But right now, things are looking to normal to above normal for snowpack. So again, I really don't have any concerns per se in terms of supply being there. So, and as Lori alluded to, we have 250 megawatts procured of purchased power that typically is used to cover not just our peak hour, but we're looking across into like hour ending 22, the later part of the on-peak period, because again, that's where the greater risk resides in terms of making sure that we have enough supply to serve our load at night. I'm not even going off my notes here. I guess I should. So one thing that is, so one thing that's changing this summer for PNM that we didn't really have in 24 is the amount of battery storage that we have on the system today. Or even last summer, we integrated Arroyo, and we had some smaller batteries that we were getting accustomed to understanding the characteristics and how to manage the charge and discharge and how to place it in the time period where we use it to offset and absorb the excess solar that we have during the daylight hours and discharge it. But now we have 2 years under our belt, and we have a good knowledge base and experience in how we manage that. And so for this summer, we're going to have close to 680 megawatts of 4-hour battery. So that's going to really help us a lot, as well as just wish we had twice as much, because honestly, we sure as heck could use it. I mean, and not even now I'm going to get on a soapbox, but it's not the summer months that really are problematic for us anymore. It's really the shoulder months. With the portfolio that we have in the PNM system, with the amount of renewables we have, especially solar, our solar portfolio has grown from, it was 800 megawatts at one time, and let's say back in 2020, it's over 1,400 megawatts now, and it's going to grow to 1,700 megawatts by 2027, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. That it's the shoulder months that are problematic, because we have sometimes 3 times as much generation as we have load during the daylight hours. And it's not just PNM, it's APS, it's California ISO. I think I've seen some reports that California has had, I think they tracked the top 25 days. There's this one form that we subscribe to that tracks curtailments that California treats. And the top 25 days, I think so far, dating back to maybe 5 years ago, the top 5 have now occurred in 2025 since January, and we're barely entering the spring season. So what does that tell you in terms of how much renewables are out there on the grid and with not enough battery? But anyways, going back to, so we have enough experience managing our renewable penetration. I think we've gotten accustomed to it, and we know how to utilize those resources to, again, not just serve our peak load, but another layer of complexity that we have to deal with now is with the Energy Transition Act and carbon emissions and managing to that 400 pounds per megawatt hour. It's very restrictive in terms of how we utilize our carbon emitting resources, that we have to plan for that. And not just because we have so much renewables during the daylight hours, that much like, nothing like El Paso. I wish we had that kind of footprint back in the day when had that nice pretty curve and had a lot of base resources that, that were there that you could commit on. Nowadays, we don't, especially during daylight hours. We have to basically turn off all of our gas. We have 4 corners back down to our minimum take, which is roughly 20 megawatts, because that's the dirtiest of our carbon emitting. That if we ran that up to full load, it would really put us in a tight spot in terms of ensuring that we are going to get under that 400 pounds over the 3-year average. But over the summer months, one thing that we do plan for is ensuring that we will lean on all of our thermal resources. And we plan for that in terms of ensuring that we have the ability to bring all our plants on to serve our peak load. But typically, we don't have the luxury of keeping some of those gas units online during the day just because it just puts us into a longer position over the daylight hours that we typically will cycle them, usually cycle them, turn them online around 5, 6 o'clock at night, run them overnight most of the time, and then cycle them off at 7 o'clock in the morning when the sun is rising and then back on again. We have typically an 8-hour turnaround to do that. So there's typically enough downtime to be able to manage for that. Anyways, to carry forth in terms of that, my day ahead and real time group, I mean, I think that they do a great job, and I have the utmost confidence that they're going to be able to set the position every day in a position that not just ensures a reliability system, but also minimizes costs for our customers in terms of whether we are going to go out there and buy the best product to fill any gaps we have, or if we optimize and sell into the market to increase the off-system sales revenue that is used as an offset to reduce our costs. I think I've said enough on that slide. We can move to the next one. Lori mentioned our cost projections for this upcoming summer. We pulled this table and these numbers from the recent quarterly reset filing that PNM makes each quarter that kind of projects out, and I think it was filed in mid to late March, if I recall, that projects out the fuel and purchase power cost total by month, and we included June through September, as well as the anticipated forecasted peak customer demand load for each month in terms of just total energy. Right now, so the risk to those costs, again, if we anticipate or see an extensive heat wave across the entire West, much like we saw in the summer of 2020, in addition to increases in natural gas prices, which typically go hand in hand, if the market sees that it's hot across the entire West, just prices go up, and gas prices go up, and most definitely power prices go up, and capacity gets tight. So that is most definitely going to be a risk factor, depending on, if we need to lean on the market for incremental day ahead and hour ahead purchases. Obviously that will increase those costs. Another risk factor there is our off-system sales revenue. We have forecasted prices in terms of what we anticipate we'll be able to sell any excess energy we have on the grid that is in the money based on hourly price forecast, which fortunately or unfortunately is during the solar hours. And what we've seen so far in 2025 across those hours, prices have been in a negative in terms of, it's like you can't even give it away, or you can give it away, but you got to pay somebody to take your energy. That it's really problematic for us. And again, as I mentioned, that's part of the reason why I think summer typically is not as difficult for PNM anyways, serving our load. It's more managing the system during the shoulder months in terms of understanding how we can work amongst the boundaries of our PPA contracts and obligations in terms of how we serve that load or serve the output of those renewable resources, integrate them into our batteries. But again, in the summer months it's a lot easier because our loads are up higher and the market typically is able to allow it. And so we're able to manage it a lot easier. But again, if those prices come in lower than what we anticipate, off-system revenue could come in lower than, and it also will have an impact to the overall costs associated with that. And again, an NPNM load, depending on what we anticipate for our forecasted load overall, could come in higher, which would require incremental market purchases, or it can come in lower and market could go in the toilet, much like we saw last summer, and prices just may not materialize. I think I said enough there. I'm not sure if there's any questions.
Yeah, I have a question. So can you talk about curtailments for solar specifically, and kind of what strategy you employ when you have excess generation, probably due to solar?
And we'll start with more of the planning perspective. So you guys have seen and will continue to see in our resource filings, additional battery. So we have a large number of battery coming in as a part of the 26 portfolio. You see almost exclusively standalone battery in that 2028 resource portfolio. These are some of the reasons, is to help manage curtailment, but to ensure that we've got adequate capacity as well. Capacity is kind of king on the system for us right now. And with limitations on the GHG side, that capacity today can really only come from 4-hour battery. So I'll let him talk about more real time.
So operationally, we have roughly 290 megawatts of Palo Verde generation that is a network resource. We typically utilize the output from Palo Verde to kind of help balance the system as a whole. Either we do it on the day ahead or hour ahead. So as we look at our forecasted demand each hour, and then as well as our forecasted renewable output each hour. There are times that we don't have enough Palo Verde generation to kind of offload that, or the market is turned super negative, that typically we do what we can on the day ahead to bring that number down. We put as much of that generation into our batteries, and we try to schedule the charge cycle of the batteries. And again, it's typically it's a 4-hour battery. So we don't necessarily have to charge it across just 4 hours. We can stretch it out for as many hours as we like, but there's only so much state of charge that it's capable of handling. But as I mentioned earlier, that sometimes we can have, I think the highest number we saw so far this year was, I think, 800 to 900 megawatts of excess generation above our demand. That there are times that we are just out of options in terms of we've sold off all of our Palo Verde assets, and basically we don't have any other gas running besides, I think Luna typically is online around the clock because of the other owners in it. But we typically back our shares down to the min take, which is approximately 15 to 20 megawatts. And right now with GT2 out of service, we are capable of taking it up to full 95 megawatts. But typically, the only solution for us is once we have done what we can with the batteries and charging them, you typically have to curtail them. And/or we also try to flow that excess energy into the EIM market. So we're at the mercy basically of what the market can take, as well as if there is available non-firm transmission from the Albuquerque load pocket up to Four Corners Sound. As I'm sure you're well aware, there are point-to-point firm network customers that have procured the transmission path from eastern New Mexico up to the Four Corners area. So when the wind is blowing in eastern New Mexico, basically it ties our hands in terms of our ability to export any of that excess energy out of the PNM system. That at that point, we notify our power operations group down over on Rio Bravo that we have an oversupply situation, and they typically will either flag or they have controls themselves within their systems to be able to curtail output from certain sites. And I think they try to pick on certain ones at certain times and not just one at all the time. So they try to share the pain, as you can say. And so that's basically the nature of how our system is currently set up. And then, as Lori mentioned, until we get more batteries on our grid, it's just going to be a thing for us to do moving forward, especially shoulder months in terms of curtailments. Is curtailment because of oversupply, which is typically a reliability situation. You cannot have an overgen situation on the PNM system or anywhere, because you have your NERC requirements in terms of being able to balance your system to load for generation. That just the only option is to curtail.
Thank you.
Okay, no other questions there. Full on slide 7, speaking specifically to our stakeholder engagements, we've continued to really focus on reaching out to our stakeholders, the transparency of that. With our reports, we continue to provide reporting on our San Juan and Palo Verde replacements. We've also continued with our external stakeholder meetings, really reaching out in advance, really sharing what PNM is doing or plans to do. And in some cases, we've done this even before we filed, listening to the feedback, taking into consideration things that we can include in the filing or change in the filing. A recent example of this was from our recent RFP from our 23 integrated resource plan. We provided a draft in advance of that RFP, listened to the feedback from the stakeholders, and integrated that into that RFP that was finalized and issued. Again, the importance of that, really just listening to what our stakeholders, the questions that they have, the feedback that they're giving us, really so that PNM can be transparent with our planning and going forward. So I think that's all I have on that slide. Any other questions?
Here. Anybody want to ask any questions? Well, seeing none, I just appreciate again coming in and having the conversation. You know, it's interesting to hear about how we've shifted away from the summer and, you know, the obligatory conversation about duck curves. And maybe we never hear that again, but into the springtime. So, and I don't know, just we've been out in commissioner land for a couple of months, and people are talking a lot about demand flexibility, and so especially overgen situations, right? So there are some different types of storage facilities that are emerging, and so there's a lot going on. Thank you.
I just have one more comment, kind of going back to the curtailment. And it's not ideal, right? But the cost to customers matter as well. And so thank you in advance for managing those resources in a way that is best for customers.
Absolutely. Right. Well, thanks again. And then I will suggest we take a 10-minute break. Get a little fidgety up here. So SPS at 11 is the current plan.
You're not by that.
And I've got a whole nother set recharging, so we got it for this afternoon.
was gonna say, what time are we supposed to end? So I can make sure, keep an eye on the.
Well, our next thing is at 1:30, so.
Lori said.
Please don't go till
So
1:30.
what time would you like to go to lunch? No, I'm just kidding.
I brought a peanut butter sandwich.
Lori says 11:05.
Okay,
Yeah, Lori's got a reservation at Tia Sophia's at 11. So anyway, looking forward to the presentation. Don't feel pinched for time.
well,
Having said that, brevity is the soul of wit.
we will keep it snug. Good morning, Brooke Trammell with SPS, Regional Vice President, Regulatory and Pricing. With me today is Justin Gable. Justin is our Director of Resource Planning and Bidding for SPS. He is currently administering, him and his team, the RFP process in our current integrated resource plan that's before the commission. Justin has not been our presenter in prior summer readiness presentations, but has a very similar role today, as you've heard from his counterparts in the past. I'll just start with a few kind of thematic topics for our presentation today, and then we'll step through the slides, and then Justin will get into some of the details. But to kind of summarize, like the others have, we're pretty sufficiently prepared for summer of 2025 from a capacity standpoint. We have sufficient resources on the system to not only meet our summer 2025 load, but also the required planning reserve margin minimum that's established in the SPP for this upcoming season. Our position, as you've heard across the last 2 years, is getting tighter on the SPS system. That's a function of our increasing load growth, the increasing planning reserve margin requirements in the pool, as well as retiring generation on our fleet in the coming years. You've heard us talk about these things, and all of those needs are represented in our current IRP. As this commission is well aware, the current IRP represents a very material need on our system through the end of the decade. The capacity need period or resource acquisition period in that RFP is largely 2028 through 2030. Obviously, today's presentation is talking about more near-term system positions. But as we think about the size of that RFP, we issued a need for approximately 3,300 accredited megawatts in that time period. In relation to our total installed capacity today, our system's about 5,500 accredited megawatts. So just kind of gives you some perspective on the size of that RFP for SPS. We have in the deck some information on nameplate capacity and the resources there. But overall, you'll see in our presentation that the capacity position in the SPP market is also getting tighter. Capacity is more strained for all load serving entities in the pool. And so we see some of those influences as a market participant, both in the changing and evolving planning reserve margin requirements, but also in the availability of capacity for other short-term purchases and things as load serving entities or LSEs may need that in the future. I'll just note, we do have a couple of fleet changes on our system that do not affect the resource position for 25. Recent proceedings before this commission have highlighted things like our Harrington coal conversion to natural gas. That conversion is underway, as well as we had some recent CCNs and PPA approvals that are bringing on new resources to SPS's system, and we have some slides that'll cover that. But those resources, either due to just the conversion not affecting the accredited capacity position really, or the in-service dates of those new resources, is why you don't see kind of a plus or minus impact in this upcoming summer. I'll also add, as a member of the SPP and a market participant in the integrated marketplace, our resource adequacy planning dynamic and operations in real time are a little different than the other 2 utilities in New Mexico. As a market participant, we present our load to the market, as well as commit our resources into the market for dispatch. SPP collects load information from all load serving entities in the pool, collects all the bid information from all the available resources, and then economically dispatches the resources to serve load across the footprint on an economical basis. So the resources that we have on our system are required to meet, again, our forecasted load and the planning reserve margin requirement. But in real time, we may be served or we may be serving our load with other resources from the pool. But from a resource adequacy standpoint, today we're talking about the resource requirements that we have to have on the system, again, to cover our load and meet the PRN requirements. You've heard a little bit today about the shoulder months. I'll just add on to that from SPS's perspective. Outage planning in the shoulder months, so non-summer and non-winter seasons, is increasingly becoming more tight for load serving entities in the pool. The establishment of a winter planning reserve margin shortens the windows that generation and transmission outages can occur in, and we see impacts to scheduling and resource availability, again, mostly in the summer months as a function of those changes. So in summary, we are well positioned now, but additional resources will be required on our system to meet evolving resource adequacy requirements and serve new load. So let's jump into the slides. Slide 2 is just a summary of our service territory. We serve Texas and New Mexico, but in New Mexico, approximately 126,000 retail customers are served in 16 communities. And you can see, while we do serve areas of Tucumcari, Clovis, and Roswell, a vast majority of our Southeast New Mexico load is in the southern Lee and Eddy counties, down around Hobbs and Carlsbad. Slide 3 is a picture of our existing generation. As I mentioned, we have about 7,700 megawatts of installed nameplate capacity on an accredited standpoint. That's roughly the 5,500 that I talked about. For reference, our 2024 peak production load was, or peak demand was about 4,400 megawatts. So, as we think about where our peak is trending, it's certainly a function of a very high load factor system. Our commercial and industrial customer base, has a very, very high load factor, and that drives a high load factor on our system as well. So we see in 24 in August peak demand, but trending towards, a more constant load factor on our system across all the seasons. The graph or the map that you see here kind of shows the location of some of our generation units. In the Panhandle area, Harrington is the unit that I discussed converted to gas and is in the process of finalizing that conversion now. We also have our Tolk coal facility more in the middle of the service territory that has a current retirement date 2028. And then in the Southeast New Mexico region, that's where we saw some of the recent resource additions through the 2022 RFP and the CCN proceedings that were before the commission last year. Slide 3 is a visual representation of the footprint of the Southwest Power Pool. We are a member, and the SPP commenced market operations in the integrated marketplace in 2014. As I mentioned, we have separate day-ahead and real-time markets in the SPM or SPPIM that are settled daily. And this is a function of how we offer our resources into the market and ensure that our load forecast is represented and then sufficiently covered by SPP's dispatch. So again, for today's discussion, we're talking about our load and resource adequacy requirements again, because we have to cover enough committed resources to serve our load plus the required planning reserve margin requirement. Our planning reserve margin requirements are a little higher than some of the numbers you've heard today, and Justin will be talking about some of those details. I'll kick it over to Justin now in transitioning in slide 5. Slide 5 is a table that's published by the SPP. This table is as of June of 2024. It'll be updated in the normal course of business by SPP in June of 25, but it just shows you a forecasted change in the resource position for the SPP market as a whole. You can see declining planning reserves through 2029. And from an excess capacity standpoint, again, for the entire SPP footprint, we see shortages beginning to be identified in 2027. So again, as a load serving entity, we have to have enough committed resources to serve our load and meet our PRM requirements. But this just kind of gives an overall picture of the entire pool is getting tighter, and we do anticipate additional resources will likely be added in the pool as well as on our system through our current IRP process. So Justin, I'll turn it over to you. You can give a quick introduction of you and your position, and then maybe pick up here on this table.
It's all right.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you for your time today. I'm Justin Gable, Director of Resource Planning for SPS at Xcel Energy. So today I was going to talk a little bit about the SPS system. On this first slide, as Brooke alluded to, we're showing the SPP position. SPP and SPS show a similar trend. Our current RFP right now is looking for resources between 27 and 30. The same situation is existing for SPP as a whole. So the general trend for the entire market also aligns with SPS's positions. We're also seeing, we'll go to the next slide, please. When we look at SPS specifically, this is our summer 2025 load and resources table. In the top right hand, we can see that the existing resources that we currently have, we have a substantial backing of own thermal resources. We also have purchased power thermal resources that take the backbone of the system. And we also have layered renewables for both company owned and power purchase agreements on top of that, which gives us a total accredited capacity position of 5,469 megawatts. Currently, these accredited capacity numbers are on the existing SPP accreditation methodology. It will change in 2026. We'll have some more slides talking about that. On slide 20, I'm sorry, on the 2025 position, the renewables are their accredited capacities based upon past performance, and in the future they'll be moved to more of an ELCC accreditation methodology. You can see here the load that we're forecasting right now for summer 25. We ultimately end with a firm load obligation of 4,480 megawatts. The current PRM position, or I'm sorry, the current planning reserve margin at SPP is set at 15%. That 15% equals 669 megawatts, which gives us a total planning reserve margin requirement of 5,128, which results in a long position of 317 megawatts. When we go back and look at the last year's peak, we actually had under forecasted. So it just kind of highlights the variability that these positions have. This is where our planning numbers are, but it's not necessarily a exact science on getting that specific number. Could be changes because of weather or other situations, and we could talk about some of those challenges that may happen in the future.
And I might just add for context on this LNR table presentation, when we look at the loads here, this is our system load, obviously, just to trend a little on the jurisdictional split between Texas and New Mexico. Our current production peak in New Mexico accounts for about 44% of SPS's production load. As the commission knows, our last wholesale ramp downs will occur in summer of 2026. So after 26, we'll only have retail load. And New Mexico is forecasted to move to about 47% of our production peak by summer of 26, and then approaches 48% by the end of the decade. So we're seeing, even with the wholesale ramp downs, an increase in New Mexico load that's driving an increase in the jurisdictional allocation of resources to serve the jurisdiction.
Thank you, Brooke. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this slide here indicates the current load growth that we are seeing in the SPS territory. So we're seeing significant load growth across the entire multi-jurisdictional system, both Texas and New Mexico. On the graph, you can see the light pink color that represents New Mexico's AQ request, and the red indicates the Texas. You see there's a lot of variability in the Texas from year to year, but it's a steady increase up, and New Mexico's position is a steady increase up as well. Just to give it a little bit of context, in 2019, we were seeing 15 load study requests totaling 259 megawatts for New Mexico. Once we get to 2022, we see those numbers substantially jump up to 1,134 megawatts in New Mexico with 38 retail load requests. Last year in 2024, we saw 78 retail load requests, totaling over 2,412 megawatts. So the load requests are continuing to increase, and that's what our current RFP is planning to meet. So to the next slide. So as a part of SPP, the Regional Transmission Organization, SPP establishes some of our resource adequacy requirements and policies that we have to follow. So we talked about the 25 position. These are some of the things that are coming down the pipeline very quickly. So we have PRM changes, the capacity accreditation changes for both thermal and renewable resources and battery storage, and then also winter season requirement addition that is coming up. All of these changes, though, are being made to improve reliability in the face of an evolving resource mix. So as we see new renewable resources come on and new technologies like battery storage, these changes or these policy and requirements are changing to adapt to those resource mixes. So with these changes, you can see that the winter season requirement addition is coming on. SPS continues to be a summer peaking utility. But what we're seeing is that with this winter resource requirement, ultimately resource development will be driven by the winter PRM requirements and also the accreditation changes between the seasons. So we'll have accreditation methodology that applies for a summer season and then accreditation methodology that applies for a winter season. So to kind of give a little bit more of a timeline on exactly what those changes look like. Starting the winter of 26-27, that's when the winter resource obligation that we currently have is converted into a requirement. And that requirement will be established at the 15% PRM, which is the current summer PRM. That winter season runs from December 1st through March 31st, with resources required to be on by December 15th through March 15th. Starting summer of 26, we start seeing increases to the PRM based upon the LOLE studies. Currently, the increase of PRM for summer 26 goes from 15 to 16%. And that's accreditation is in conjunction with two different methodology changes for the resources. So we move to a performance-based accreditation methodology for thermal generations that's based off of the NERC GADS data and forced outages. And then ELCC accreditation for intermittent resources like wind and solar and the storage resources. So the performance-based accreditations, we mentioned that they are going to be slightly different between summer and winter. So the difference is that we have a forced outage rating that is utilized for the accreditation methodology with both seasons. And in addition to that, in the winter, there's a fuel assurance component that's added on top of the forced outage information to give to derive the thermal accreditation for winter. The ELCC accreditation for intermittent technologies, we also see a seasonal impact between those resources. In general, wind stays fairly stable between the seasons, and it is trending towards a 15% ultimate accreditation methodology or accreditation value. Batteries and solar both have a slightly perform slightly worse in the winter versus the summer. So the the intermittent resources that we have on the system, in conjunction with the winter PRM requirement being added on, those resources are less able to contribute to the resource adequacy position during the winter time. So beyond 2028, the SPP issued a revision request 664 to the open access transmission tariff. In that, we're seeing increases to the PRM in addition to what we've already talked about. So right now, the summer PRM that is going to be in place in summer 26, which is 16%, will move to a 17% value in the summer of 29. And during the following winter of 29 and 30, we'll see the PRM changing from 36% to 38%. And all of these percentages are based upon a nameplate capacity value. Ultimately, when we have to comply with these requirements, it's on an ACAP PRM, which is an accredited capacity PRM. So these numbers adjust, and they will adjust yearly based upon the performance of units across the entire SPP system. So those numbers are fairly stable, and the nameplates PRMs are stable, but from year to year, we'll see slight adjustments when we have to comply with an ACAP PRM that is responding to the performance of units across the system and also penetration of renewable technologies onto the system as well.
So I think we'll pause here. We have another slide that kind of talks about the IRP a little more and some other information requested by the commission to be prepared for this presentation, but I think this may be a good time for questions.
Yeah, but thank you for that explanation and so just wanted to clarify a couple of things here with respect to the performance-based accreditation and the ELCC accreditation. So for thermal generation, is that performance-based accreditation measuring the performance of the entire thermal fleet, or is it a utilities fleet or by unit? How does that work?
Yeah, there's kind of two components to it. First off, it's mostly driven by the specific unit's performance, and it's a 7-year look back on historical performance for that unit. So that is where the bulk of that calculation is derived from. In the winter, with the fuel assurance component as well, they're trying to take into account the potential impacts on a system-wide outage, for fuel supply, things like that. So an entire system-wide position is also layered on into the winter. So you have like more of an individual look in the summer, and then in the winter, an individual unit look plus a system. And then when I say system, I mean SPP-wide system look that's layered into it as well.
Okay, and then the same question for the accreditation for the intermittent storage resources. Is it measured like based on its performance? And I guess another question is, how do you do it if it's a new unit? So can you speak to that, please?
Yes, so the ELCC will be a component of, it will be changing every year, and it's a function of penetration of a specific technology into the market. So as a resource type is further developed into the market, we see decline in that technology type's ability to perform during those peak hours. So for wind, we have a fairly extensive penetration of that technology into the market. So we see a fairly stable ELCC value of around 15%. It's not exactly 15, but around there. And over time, it stays fairly stable. But with technologies like batteries, especially 4-hour batteries, we're seeing a very steep decline on the ELCC models that SPP is providing. That once you get, as you continue to add an additional 1,000 megawatts of those technology types onto the system at a fairly low penetration, we're seeing a very sharp decline in those unit or those technologies' ability to meet the PRM requirements during our peaks.
Okay, and is there a reflection of like geography, like where the resource is actually located? I don't know if that makes sense, but you can, think about, oh, there's this technology, and so this is what, the ELCC is, or there's this technology and it's located here, right? There are so many hours of solar, or, historically wind has been this much. Is that reflected in there?
So the ELCC study is performed annually by SPP, and the data inputs to that report are for all for all those units that are going into it. So as we expect to bring on new units like the Cunningham battery or Cunningham solar projects that are coming onto our system in 26 to 27, we submit those resources to SPP with a production profile so that they can add those to the model, and they use historic weather events in our units profiles to develop a system-wide ELCC calculation for the technology. So yes, our individual units' performance or expected performance and the region's functions, so like weather, the production profile is going to be a function of weather modeled for that unit. When we give that information to SPP, it's aggregated. So that information is taken into account in the calculation, but it is a system-wide calculation.
Okay, I understand. Thank you for that.
I appreciate the description, and I think you accurately described what's going on at SPP. One quibble is performance doesn't drop when you add more.
Yes,
SPP's willingness to give it credit drops as you add more. So my personal frustration at SPP is they're two things. They're bad at thinking about new things. So if they could talk to Steve Maestas, we could really advance the ball quickly here. And then the other is exactly what Commissioner Aguilera said, that if you look at SPP's footprint, it stretches from Mexico to Canada, and especially in the winter, you've got different situations going on in different regions. So it's really more about transfer capacity in and out of zones, but they don't even think about things that way. So I again appreciate your description. It's an accurate description of what's going on at the moment. I'm hoping each year that you come back, you tell us how SPP's gotten smarter and better, because right now it's grim. The assumptions that they make about how batteries get operated in their modeling. I'm doing my best to try to move that ball forward, but it's been a frustrating experience.
Yes, and I apologize for the bad languaging that I did, but appreciate you understanding the where I was going with the comment. I would also say that there are other battery technologies besides 4-hour that SPP does study. They do study 6 and 8-hour batteries, and what we are seeing is those technologies performance better, but the trend towards being able to account their credited capacity for 8-hour and 6-hour storage are less affected as the technology penetrates into the market. So there is some value in being able to compare different battery technologies even within batteries.
Yeah, I'd say my biggest complaint is in the modeling, they don't account for the idea that an operator is going to make good decisions. They just say, hey, here's 24 hours. This battery will be dispatched in these hours. Doesn't matter what else is going on. And that just blows away the flexibility that storage offers, and their accreditation then pushes that number down. And then when you're trying to hit these raising reserve margins, it's from a regulator point of view, really bad situation.
Understand?
And I know they're working on it. Got to go through the whole real team list before, and then probably have to get some batteries online because they don't seem willing or able to learn from other operators who have a lot of batteries. So I'm afraid it's going to be a long process, but sorry, that was more of my soapbox.
No, I appreciate the perspective.
Ms. Trammell probably doesn't want to hear this again because I think we talked about it last week, but all the readiness and adequate resources don't mean much if we can't get the power where it's needed when it's needed. And the wind stops blowing. We know it's going to stop blowing. We forecast those things, but if we're not prepared for those events, they have dramatic effects, and people can't turn their power on when they need it. And so last week, at least a couple of us had discussions with some of the SPP people that were here, and asked them, to get with you all to figure out what happened a few weeks ago and try to make sure that lessons were learned and that those things don't happen again. And so my question is, have they reached out to you? Are there any conversations being had to make sure that those communications get delivered timely so that you all can respond to those events and turn your gas plants on in Hobbs and maybe take care of some of the shortages that we saw in southeastern Mexico a few weeks ago?
Yes, Commissioner Nyberg, thank you for the question, and thank you for this commission's engagement on the topic. As I mentioned, we do see a tightening shoulder season here, right, with generation transmission outages, and that does affect resource availability, which for especially a high load factor system like ours, it can affect resource adequacy in a non-summer, non-winter season. We saw that on March 31st with an unfortunate load shed dispatch received by SPP in the early morning hours. again, in March in a shoulder month, something that we would not necessarily expect to see. That was a function of unit availability and unplanned and planned generation and transmission outages, as well as some other factors on the system. But we've met with SPP several times. We've discussed the events leading up to the event, to the dispatch call from our perspective. They've shared perspective from their desk. I think one of the learnings from that situation, which we also had a similar situation in 2024, in a time period that, is not a summer month, is not when you would kind of expect some of those pressures to be there. And we're seeing kind of similar trends, but from a transmission control center perspective, right, we have a desk of operators that are seeing the full picture, right? They're seeing maybe the reliability pressures on the system. And when SPP calls our commercial operations desk to inquire about resource availability, that group doesn't necessarily see the transmission picture, right? As a wholesale power marketing function, they may not see the transmission picture the same way that the SPP operators do, or that the transmission control center does. And so we're really focused on increasing the level of attention and kind of concern in these time periods where we're already strained by seasonal shoulder months generation and transmission outages, and when we may have other units unavailable in the system. And so just increasing the speed of communications, having better delivery of the kind of reliability needs that might be present when the SPP is calling to inquire about the status of a generator and how quickly it can come online. We think that's, one of the issues in that event. By the time that call was made, they were calling and inquiring about our quick start units, but not quick enough. We had units available that could have been brought on in 30 minutes, and they were kind of calling us under the 30-minute time frame. So we can fix those things, right? We have the generation available. Performance-based accreditation does matter, but in real time, our units are ready to be spun up, and they need to be seen that way by SPP, and we need to be coordinating sooner to make sure that can be avoided. We also need to continue to educate different personnel on both sides, right? From an operations standpoint on what we call kind of operational guides. There are certain truths on the system that should be respected, in particular load pockets. For example, if generation is offline at Cunningham unit or a Maddox unit, it's not a good idea to take a generator outage at Hobbs, the Hobbs PPA plant, right? Or if those kind of units are down, it's not a good idea to approve an outage of maybe one of the golden spread units in that region, right? There's different things that shouldn't be true at the same time. And we try to reflect those in a co-authored ops guide with SPP. And I think these shoulder month sensitivities have seen and proven a need to expand some of the provisions that are detailed in our ops guide with the RTO. So those are a couple examples of the things that we're working through with SPP. They are performing this kind of root cause analysis for the event, and we'll be issuing a report with their findings in the coming weeks.
Well, I did let them know that the growth we've seen in particularly Southern Eddy and Lee counties and the demand that you all have continues to increase, and yet we're still not seeing power poles go up. And so when I saw the NextEra folks, I said, we need poles in the ground. We need wires strung across for Southern Eddy and Lee counties. And I continue to mention that to SPP as well. So hopefully not just the projections, but some of the actual demand that exists there will get service hopefully within the next 2 or 3 years.
Yes, we agree. And we thank this commission for engagement on these topics and issues. We represent here in this upcoming season that we're capacity sufficient. But we are, as a result of in-servicing of new transmission projects and the timing of new generation additions, are having to take a very measured approach to load growth. And a lot of load that's being requested on the system and we're trying to add can't be added until things are built. So those new transmission lines and new power plants are the gate that will open for new load on our system. So that requires level of engagement with our customers as well. But until new generation is approved, SPP will likely not study and not approve incremental load requests on SPS's system. And so with the process that we have with the pool, they don't decide generation decisions, they decide transmission decisions, and we see those results coming out annually. in the integrated transmission plan, with many projects being identified in SPS's load zone. But we continue to need to model generation in the SPP planning models, so that not only will the transmission studies reflect the anticipated load and generation, but that we can make progress on studying additional load requests. We can have more confidence in the load projections that we bring forward to the IRP stakeholder processes and to the commission when we present evidence on the need of resources in the CCN. So it's a partnership. And our customers are also very engaged in the process. We see a lot of our customers become members of SPP to be engaged in these conversations as well. And so again, I just say appreciate the commission's learning and understanding of these dynamics in SPP, and in support of us trying to solve these puzzles and get new things built to serve our growing load, especially in Southeast New Mexico. Knowing we stand between you all and lunch, the last couple slides we'll hit quickly. We covered on slide 10 some of the information here in the current all source RFP. Justin, I'll let you share a little bit more about the structure of that RFP and where we're at in the process. It's a case before the commission, but I think these are good milestones just to touch on in the context, particularly of upcoming summer readiness conversations.
Thanks. Thank you, Brooke. So we're currently in the middle of a source RFP, meaning over 3,000 megawatts. Brooke mentioned earlier 3,300 megawatts by the summer of 2030. We've received all the bids by January 3rd of this year. Inside that RFP, we had three options. The first option was the replacement of Tolk Unit 1 and 2, the coal generation. In option 2, we had the potential for replacement or extensions at the Nichols 1 and Nichols 2, and Maddox 1 and Plant X4 gas units. That option 2 consisted of about 521 megawatts of gas generation. So in addition to the 1,000 megawatts or so of coal replacement, the 521 megawatts of gas, we also modeled as a part of this RFP 1,500 megawatts of incremental new generation needs. Currently, what we saw with the RFP was well participated by a range of bidders, with optionality in different types of commercial structures, that being self-build, build transfer, PPAs, geographic locations across the SPS territory, and a range of technology types. Currently, we're in the middle of computer modeling. So.
I would say a little too soon and potentially at this stage non-public, as we're still in the middle of portfolio selection, but would anticipate following the announcement of a portfolio and the presentation of information to the commission, we can address that. Any other questions on the RFP? Slide 11 and 12 are information requested by the commission for this presentation. Again, a little bit different presentation for SPS as a member of the IM. So just to recap, generation is committed by all load serving entities and then economically dispatched by the SPP market based on load serving entities offer or generation owners offer of those unit costs. So all generation that's offered into the market is dispatched by SPP based on availability. So what we've represented here is the 2024 average day ahead summer LMPs at the SPS node. So this is a reflection again of once all the load is represented in the market, all the committed resources are dispatched by SPP in that economic dispatch, kind of the resulting market prices that we see by month in the day ahead market. So these are benchmarks, but kind of indicative of the LMPs we could experience in 2025. The last slide just recognizes, as others have stated today, that these prices are highly influenced by things happening in the market, not just on SPP or SPS's system. So fuel prices, renewable production, weather, changes in demand across the summer, outages, planned and unplanned. So we could see forced outages, of course, in the summer months, both from a generation transmission perspective, not just on our system, but from other TOs, transmission owners or other generation owners in the pool. And we see transmission congestion, as a reminder, we're at the bottom of the SPP. We're kind of a peninsula down at the bottom of that 14-state footprint, so congestion can occur on our system, and we are limited a little bit by import capabilities. And then we do have some emission constraints on units and other things that can drive environmental and dispatch considerations of our fleet. So that's it for our prepared slides. We really appreciate the time to come in and appreciate these conversations in advance of the summer. I think there was a comment earlier in the day that it's lightened up a little bit since the first summer readiness workshop we had as a group. But I think we are certainly at SPS anticipating, a dynamic and evolving system in the coming years. And we look forward to a multitude of resource additions to level out our load and begin to serve new load in Southeast New Mexico through electrification and economic development for our communities. So, thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And okay, so we've accepted all the presentations we had planned for this morning. I had great question and answer session, I think, during those. Commissioners, are there any closing remarks, or are we ready to start sweating because summer's coming?
Well, just want to thank the utilities for coming and presenting. I think this really provides a good understanding of where we stand for the summer, and also important to recognize that that's just this summer. Challenges are still coming up. We have growing load, we have retirements, we have planning reserve margins that are increasing, and each one of those on their own are a challenge to deal with. And then when you put them all together, that's even more challenging. And so definitely recognize that. I don't think it's necessarily a situation that is occurring only here. It's occurring everywhere. Whether that makes it easier or harder, I don't know, but we have work to do, and thank you to the utilities and the stakeholders that continue to be engaged.
Probably should have asked this 3 times to each one, but on any of your forecasts, did any of you consider the likelihood of a significant data center locating in your service territory that would maybe spike your demand for service? Were any of the figures in here considering any of those abnormal, what I consider abnormally large demands that may be placed on your system?
Not in the near term for us.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, it's
Thanks.
for SPS, our planning forecast reflects studied and approved data center load. There is not a representation in the IRP of maybe more speculative.
At electricity conference I was at the beginning of the week, the specter of a truck mounted data center came up.
A truck.
Well, I mean, how's it gonna show up by this summer, isn't it? Drives it in.
Well, I was just going to add that, it kind of adds even more to what I said about the challenges, right? Because you have this load that the utilities are planning here for, or at least forecasting for, which seems to be maybe more realistic or less speculative. But then you also you get into kind of the economic development side of it. And and how that can help. And that's also a challenge. We also have a desire to bring more manufacturing here, right? That's even more load that we have. And so I guess I would add to the challenges limited capacity, transmission capacity, the distribution system. So it's really, and then supply chain issues and increasing costs. So it's really a lot more when you think a bit about it all collectively. So now, and now I don't feel as good as I did after the presentations.
Okay, on that note, I understand Lori Williams is buying lunch and I think thanks again, and we're adjourned on this session, and then I expect I'll see many of you this afternoon at 1:30. So thank you.
Said she was buying lunch 45 minutes ago.
Oh, so you snooze, you lose, huh? They limited